A major barrier to scale for many of these AI companies is the massive cost of inference. I see a coming bloodbath in terms of churn as these budgets for AI experimentation.
Our relationship with technology is evolving rapidly. As AI is changing businesses and reshape our world, what does the future hold? Welcome everyone to another episode of AI Business Transformation. I'm Michael Coppola, and today I'm excited to be here with Ivy Nguyen, investor and GFT Ventures. So welcome, Ivy.
Thanks, Michael. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, we're really excited to dive into the work of Ivy, and we are going to talk about AI and business infrastructure, the new VC playbook, scaling with the AI, global opportunities, and what's coming next, and also some tips for founders. So, Ivy, first of all, you said before that the next breakthrough in startup wouldn't be selling software; they will be selling AI-enabled services. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, maybe I can start with a brief intro on myself, Michael, so I can share with the audience just, how I came to this conclusion. So I lead investments in AI-centric companies here at GFT Ventures. We primarily invest in seed and Series A companies that are applying AI to solving specific business as well as consumer and prosumer challenges and problems. And I actually was an AI investor long before it was cool. At the very start of my venture career, I joined one of the two first AI-only venture funds called Zeta Venture Partners. And at Zeta, we were starting to look at startups that were building new products and new businesses around what I would call the first kind of mini pre-boom in AI, centered around machine learning and natural language processing. And even then, in 2016, 2017, if members of the audience remember the advances in when AI beat human players in Go, and when IBM Watson was competing with human players in Jeopardy, we were already starting to see that the work of building an AI-centric product and a business centered around AI was actually quite different from software. It was a lot more intensive and cost intensive to get these solutions to work. Oftentimes, a software product is fairly quick and easy to build and fairly quick and easy to deploy in a customer environment, whereas an AI company required a lot of data, required a lot of time to train these models to make sure that they were at a level of accuracy that could actually be useful in a business setting. Because in when you're making decisions on what loans to allocate, for example, or what drugs to give to a patient, you want to be 99% correct, not 60% correct, right? If your model isn't ready. And you also have to actually integrate the AI model into your systems, because what an AI model is, and I think it's important to remind the audience, is a good predictor of what the answer is, or it's a good recommendation of what to do. But at the end of the day, a recommendation is only as good as what you do with it. Right. And in the business setting, if you have a recommendation that isn't tied to the action loop or the controls loop, so that downstream processes can be adapted in light of that recommendation or that prediction, then there's no business value. And so all of a sudden, you have this business and this product that is more complex on three different dimensions compared to software. It's more expensive to build, more expensive to scale, more expensive to deploy. And as such, it's very uneconomical to charge the same thing that you would for a software solution. Right? A business might spend, let's say, an enterprise company might spend globally $100,000 on a contract for an access to an API, for example, or some kind of developer tool. But when it costs $100,000 to get that AI model in commercial deployment, it's how can you make money as an AI startup, right? And especially on the other side of it, when you're actually creating a lot more value for your end customer than just a static software tool would be. And so what we were starting to see, what I was starting to see even as early as almost 10 years ago now, was that these AI, these entrepreneurs who were building companies around AI needed to find a way to capture a bigger share of the much more meaningful value that they were creating for their end customers, especially given the much higher cost of starting and scaling up their business. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, and what example you can practically picture for this model?
Yeah. So one example of that is I was tracking a lot of companies that were offering machine translation for at enterprise level quality, right? I know that even now Google Translate can do a lot, but there's still a lot of mistranslations and kind of odd robotic non-idiomatic language that gets introduced. And so if you use it during your personal travels, perfectly fine. But if you want to properly translate, let's say, machine instructions or pharmaceutical warning labels, et cetera, then you want to make sure that that's correct, right? And today, when large Fortune 5,000 customers get enterprise grade translation, they often work with what are called third party language service providers, LSPs, to provide that enterprise grade translation. It is quality control, and somebody holds that liability for what happens if that translation was done incorrectly. Um, and I think that I like to use that category of AI application as a great example for the pitfalls of taking a SaaS and software level or approach to monetization versus an AI enabled services approach to monetization. Let's say you have an AI model that allows you to translate a document with 95% accuracy, right? At almost instantaneous speed. You still need someone at the end of the day to do the final review for final quality control. But if you were to sell that software to that LSP, that language service provider, then they could use your solution to dramatically improve their throughput and have their translators, rather than having to translate every word manually, their time now is shifted to copy editing and quality control. So you need a much smaller labor force, or with that same labor force, you can take on a much greater volume of business. And so from the perspective of the language service provider, if they're buying a software tool, then they are able to dramatically increase their gross margins by a significant amount. And so we were seeing these businesses that were professional services typically make, let's say, 25 to 35% gross margins. All of a sudden, when they started using these tools, they were now operating at 70, 80% margins, which is fantastic. But from the startup's perspective, that wasn't so great, because what they were charging at the end of the day was a mere, $50 to $100,000 software license, when they were providing a huge amount of value and a huge amount of unlock for that end customer, the LSP. And so a hypothesis that I started exploring was, well, what if these technology teams that were building these translation software tools didn't actually sell to the LSPs? What if they disintermediated the LSP and they went directly to that end customer, to a Microsoft or that large pharmaceutical company, and they offer that language service translation themselves? And they can do it faster, cheaper, and at much higher margins using that technology internally, rather than selling that software to other customers that would have been their competitors. And so if you think about the opportunity that way, it's much more compelling way to be able to capture a much more meaningful share of the value that your technology, especially your like any additional leverage that the AI-driven automation can derive for your business.
Yeah, so make perfectly sense. So you basically saying that AI company that they are building deep tech solution. They should also be customer facing and to increase their basically share of their opportunity to capture value on the marketplace instead selling to so instead of selling to companies. Correct.
That's right. So you're basically, rather than selling to the customers that would have used your AI as a tool, you actually become the business that uses your AI as a tool internally, and then you create a service around that AI, enable that AI, and you compete with the incumbents instead that you would have previously sold a software solution to. But you can do it better, faster, and at much higher margins. So you're basically going up the value chain instead of just wrapping the AI around software tools and selling it to somewhere lower in the value chain.
Yeah. So this is what basically also happening. We have seen the drop in cost of the API of AI providers, so giving access to everyone intelligence that can be plugged into different SaaS solution. So you are saying the value is less into the model and more into the business as a service itself.
Yes, it's using the model to enable a change in the cost base of the service business. Right. So rather than having operating at 20 to 30% gross margins, as is typical of a services business, because you have very high labor content, you use the AI and the automation tools built around the AI to enable that same labor force to take on, let's say, 10 times the amount of volume that they previously would have been able to handle. And so with that same cost base, you can service a larger amount of revenue and be able to capture more business and deliver more business, but at much higher profitability.
You also talk about that this company, they should also take more risk on behalf of their customers. Can you explain more about that?
Yeah, and this is also related to my earlier point that AI models can be quite expensive to deploy in a production setting and in a customer environment, because in order for the AI to drive value, you need to actually integrate it into downstream workflows or into different processes to be able to change course and change behavior each time the AI model recommends you do something different. And therein is the challenge of trying to sell AI as software to, let's say, an end customer in manufacturing, right? And an example I like to use here is, let's say you have the most amazing AI model in the world that can tell you how to optimize your production. On Tuesdays, we change these inputs so that we can, based on the weather, so that we can get to 80% profitability. And next week, we see a hurricane coming in, right? And so conditions are wetter, more humid. There's issue with supply chain. So we're going to make XYZ adjustments in order to maintain that level of profitability and throughput. And if the AI model isn't connected to downstream production planning and the downstream machines, then all the AI model can do is rely on the production engineer to have to go out of their way and change the machine settings and so on in order to actually respond to that prediction and that recommendation. But what happens if that person is too busy or they forget, right? Or they don't trust the AI model and in protest, they ignore it, right? That business will not be able to recognize the value of that, that AI model could provide. And so because of that, it's really important in order to provide business value. It is really important for these AI systems to connect to these downstream controls layer and action loops. But the problem is every new system that that you need to connect to is more engineering costs, more integration, right? More time needed to deploy a system into the customer environment. And what we were finding early on, and even today, is that many customer environments may not be sufficiently digitized. You might have, let's say, 3 machines that are connected to the internet, but there's one fourth critical machine that isn't connected, right? And so you have a choice of making sure that being dependent on a person to complete that work, and we know that that often fails, or somebody has to invest the time and the engineering resources in order to connect that final critical piece to the internet to be able to connect it to the AI engine. And that's what I was referring to when I say companies take on risk on behalf of their customers. If you're already 95% of the way deployed into an environment and you find that there's this critical gap in your customer's IT stack in order to deploy, what are you going to do, right? As a startup, are you going to just say, oh, sorry, I can't help you. I have to walk away from this business? Probably not, because I think your investors and your board of directors probably have some opinions against that. And you could say, well, hey, customer, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Vice President at my customer base, I told you that this whole system I would charge you $500,000 for, but oh, I didn't realize that you had this fourth critical piece that you need that will cost another $50,000. No one's going to be happy with that, right? And so what we ended up seeing very frequently was that in order to get past that final hump of digitization and connecting to that action loop or that controls loop, that startup would have to just pay for that cost, or they would have to eat that cost of making that last leg of integration. And so that's yet another hit that the startup has to take in order to win that business, deliver on that business, and hope that that customer renews. And so the profitability of that AI company trying to sell software into the customer stack from day one is even lower. Right? And in many cases, they end up losing. That's the point where these startups end up losing money in the first couple of years of trying to sell to that customer base. And there's only so much that I think venture capitalists are willing to tolerate there. And so going back to my, my observation that many of these companies, these AI teams, were actually better off going full stack and offering AI-enabled services rather than trying to sell software, is if you use the AI system internally, you only have to design your the IT stack one time, right, for yourself, because what you're delivering for the customer is that end finished product, right? If it's in the problem space of language translation, you don't have to integrate into their content management system, their review systems, right? Their content distribution systems, blah, 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 for every language translation company. When you're delivering language translation services, you're delivering the final translated document. And so you don't have to, for every new customer that you serve, you don't have to bother with, and you don't have to worry about, well, do they have all their tech systems in place? Can we integrate into all their systems? It becomes a much more simple way to scale up your technology stack. And what that shifts the risk to instead is, can you scale up the operations of this business?
Great, Ivy. And talking about investing in AI companies, you have said that it's completely different, especially now. Can you tell about what's the difference between investing now in AI companies and before this AI explosion of generative AI?
Yep, absolutely. And it goes back to the observation that I opened up this interview with, which is that um, when venture capitalists invest, especially at the early stage where my firm GFT tends to invest, we have pretty limited information with which to make our decision, right? And so we rely a lot on wherever possible benchmarks so we can understand, well, is this company based on the one or two customer conversations and deployments that they have, is this company headed in a healthy direction? And venture capitalists, I think, at the beginning of this most recent AI boom cycle, were very well trained on what are called SaaS metrics, SaaS benchmarks. A healthy software business, a healthy SaaS business, operates at 80 to 90% gross margins. They make four times over the cost of what it takes to acquire a customer over its lifetime. Deployment usually shouldn't take more than a couple months or so, or max a quarter, and a good payback period for a new account is under a year, ideally under 6 months. And what I was seeing even as early as 2017 was that if you compare an AI company to a SaaS business, an AI company looks like an awful business, right? It's very, very expensive to try to win new business. It's very, very expensive to try to train these AI models because of the amount of data that you have to acquire, and then all the surprises that you'll discover along the way as you deploy into that customer environment, and then you end up having to subsidize the last mile of their digitization in order to integrate your AI into their systems. That costs even more, right? And so what we kept seeing was that it was very, very, very expensive to get these companies started to build an MVP. Very, very expensive to get them to deploy with every next customer, and it would take a very long time for these companies to start seeing profitability and payback on the initial cost of starting up a customer and acquiring a new customer. But on the flip side, I think what's still very compelling about an AI company compared to the last decade of pure traditional software businesses is that AI companies hold the promise of defensibility in the near term, especially when you have differences in model performance. But over the long run as well, there's the promise of defensibility as you get more data that enables you to improve the performance of your models. And we've seen lots of examples in research that empirically shows that overall quality of the model and the robustness of a model is and the model architecture is nothing compared to how much you can improve performance just based on the product data and customer data that you can acquire over time. And so you have this idea of a kind of self reinforcing positive feedback loop where if an AI company can get over that hump of the very painful cold start problem of acquiring that initial set of customers and that initial set of data, over time it would get to a chain reaction, a runaway point where it would be very, very difficult for a new challenger to come in and be able to copy it directly and compete with it directly. Whereas in the universe of traditional software businesses, because the cost of building software solutions is just getting lower and lower, just more democratized over time, um, the first movers in a given category usually don't have long-term sustained advantage. We see that in all sorts of categories, from CRM platforms to expense management platforms, ERPs, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, makes sense. So do you think that for companies that they are traditionally SaaS platform, they are integrating AI through an API, leveraging other AI companies, do you think that in the mid long term, they should also build their own AI models?
I don't think that true defensibility is in the AI models. I think that a venture-backed startup is always going to struggle with against the magnificent seven, right? The large mega tech companies that can afford to pay $100 million signing bonus to the top AI researchers and model developers. And so I actually think the opposite. I think that an AI startup has no business trying to build its own proprietary models. And that the better defensive play is to find a way to gather proprietary data that is difficult to simulate, and can't be easily accessed by the public. You can only create that data as that customer uses your product more over time, right? And as you capture more of their decisions, more of how they operate, et cetera, and use that as a way to fine tune whatever models you currently have, or whatever future state of the art models that come onto the market. It really is about the data moat and your data asset at the end of the day.
And applying that into investing for in AI companies, what is that you are looking for?
It's exactly that, right? It is looking, and we're looking at companies that and founding teams that have very strong hypotheses for how they can build that proprietary data moat. How is it that and over time, these specific categories of data that they are pursuing will actually make their product better and easier and easier to defend against new challengers, as well as against even copycat efforts from the mega tech startups, the mega tech corporations. And related to that, because that the size and depth of that data moat is so important, we're also very, very interested in engaging with founders to figure out how can you build that data moat as quickly as possible. Are there ways that you can use adjacent applications in order to get that data that you need, in order to build that core product that you're looking to build in the long run, or can you find creative ways to get more customers using your solution, so that you can generate more and more of that precious proprietary data that is key to your defensive moat.
That they are also really niche to a vertical, right? That instead of being really generalized, have a really niche market segment, so that proprietary data in that kind of niche, right?
Exactly. And I hate using the word niche, right? Because niche implies small, and venture capital is all about very big returns. And so the word that I'd like to use, and I know this is splitting hairs a bit, is obscure, right? Anything that requires a lot of expertise, anything that might require, many years of training to be considered an expert in, whether it is in legal practice and legal discovery, or whether it is making judgment calls as to the best configuration to manufacture in order to achieve certain margins and certain throughputs that a factory is targeting, or whether it is knowing how to read a radiology scan, right? When it's actually not very black and white, like what the patient might have or what you're looking at. That kind of subtle, highly expert, highly obscure, but still large multi-billion-dollar opportunities. Like those are the kinds of things that we're excited about at GFT.
Really exciting. Thanks, Ivy. And talking about AI and business infrastructure, do you see the most valuable AI companies becoming platform like infrastructure? Do you think they will be more vertically integrated, like full stack businesses? I think you have been already mentioned most of the answer through your point. Do you think there is anything to add for what you already mentioned?
I spent a lot of time talking about these vertically integrated AI-enabled services businesses, Michael, but I think that we're only at the very beginnings of seeing how AI can change business models. And I think there's also a really interesting opportunity for new platform plays. And we didn't spend much time talking about this, but one of the biggest uh, advances that LLMs create is the opportunity to connect disparate sources of information and data silos, right? And that was a challenge significantly for AI businesses, but also even before a lot of software businesses, where many of us, I'm sure, spend a lot of time even today. Doing what I would call pre-work, right? Gathering information from systems that don't talk to each other and and don't frequently need to connect with one another. And so nobody's invested in time to build a dedicated integration, putting all the information into one place, structuring that information, so then we can either put it through a model for analysis or do the parsing ourselves. So there's pre-work in order to do the real work of identifying patterns and then synthesizing and creating value out of that. And a lot of that pre-work is in using humans to act as a glue, right, for these silos that we created for ourselves because we've digitized our workflows in uneven and sort of disparate, disconnected ways. And where I'm really excited is seeing LLMs, whether it's enabled by agentic workflows or different approaches to interoperability and integrations, solving that work, right, and removing a lot of the pre-work that comprises a lot of the boring stuff that nobody really wants to do as part of their jobs today. And so I think agents that mimic different workflows and are kind of seen as the next generation of RPA, especially across different silos, is the very first wave of that. But I think there's a lot of really talented entrepreneurs that are also finding other, perhaps more, even more robust ways to leverage LLMs to solve that problem and in a scalable way. And I think that is, if you can solve that interoperability issue, being that connective tissue layer presents a really interesting and unique opportunity to be that next platform. But I think a lot of the market is still very much trying to figure that out.
So you are basically talking about as well the new wave of coming of MCP, model context protocol, that they are allowing to easily interact between application.
Yep.
Is something that you are talking about, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Is something that we are also exploring and we are integrating in our solution, and I think is one of the challenges that as business now we have to, as tech solution, we have to solve how to effortlessly connect this new smart software, right? That before we had to manually integrate each of the connection, but now we can let a model decide which connection you have to use it. So we had to find new way to interconnect between solution. And Ivy, talking about the next stage after the initial stage of the startup, so scaling with AI, how did you see the company are using AI in the next phase from startup to scale up?
Mm-hmm. Well, frankly, at the end of the day, right, I think a major barrier to scale for many of these AI companies is the massive cost of inference. Right? I mentioned earlier that at the beginning of my career, my first signals that there's something deeply different about AI. Like the first signal that something is deeply different about AI businesses is just the fact that these companies were operating at very low margins compared to SaaS businesses. And I'm talking 30, 40, 50% gross margins, contribution margin, when a SaaS business is operating at 80, 90% margin. We're still seeing a lot of that, right? And I know that a lot of the community is talking about the cost of inference going down. I think practically speaking, that's not yet true. The cost of tokens is going down as more investors pile money into the largest foundation model companies, but it's still not decreasing at a rate where we're seeing these vertical AI companies and these application layer AI companies be able to deliver business at truly the 80 to 90% gross margins that we used to see in SaaS businesses. And so I think that's something that many venture investors and many startup boards are keeping a nervous eye on. Another area that we're being cautious about is how durable the revenue is. We've the exuberance that the AI community and I think the broader AI conversation has driven over the last 3 years has dramatically decreased the friction in terms of getting a pilot started or getting a trial, getting business sponsorship and budget for trials, for pilots, and so on. But many of the vertical applications of AI that we've seen, and many of the early revenue in AI that I'm tracking, is still pilot scale or still at trial scale. And if you end up talking to any one customer in a particular vertical, even in the context of a customer reference, and you ask them, well, how many other alternatives are you trying? You might hear that in a category where there's 6 or 7 players, that customer is trialing, 5 or 6 at once, right? And at some point, they're going to have to pick one winner, one horse to back. And what's going to happen to all these other 4 that don't retain that contract is there going to be, for any one of these categories, will one company emerge as a winner, or is there going to be a horrific race to the bottom on pricing, right? Whereas these companies compete with one another in order to try to retain this revenue. I think that that's something that is coming imminently, and that there are ways to get ahead of that by being faster about future feature releases, by getting further integrated into customer workflows, by investing a lot into customer success, so that you pull on all of the levers at your disposal in order to retain that customer. But I see a coming bloodbath in terms of churn, as these budgets for AI experimentation start to contract, and it's time for these customers to really make decisions on where AI is actually proving real black and white hard business value versus something that only works maybe 40 to 50% of the time.
Ivy, and going into the global opportunities and a global overview of AI development, you have been working across different geographies. I wanted to know your perspective around. There is now, as we know, a bit of chasing the AI race between USA and China. Do you think there are other competitors in this race, or do you think this is the main player? And do you think in the future there will be, other player in the space?
I think that especially since the beginning of this calendar year and with this new administration being much more aggressive about AI protectionism, the stakes in many different geographies has increased. And I think the early days of collaboration and that culture of open source and sharing that was so endemic to early internet culture and early tech culture is going away. And I'd be hard pressed to find a single government that isn't trying to invest heavily in promoting more AI-driven innovation, whether it's in the academic setting, in defense, or even at the level of local business development councils, right, at cities and local towns, in order to attract more of this high growth potential AI business. And so I absolutely can see as the talent pipeline continues to develop and mature, more hotspots of AI excellence outside of the two spheres of the US and China. We're already seeing meaningful lineages of talent coming out of Europe, right? With companies like Mistral and et cetera, starting to get to a meaningful scale, and we're seeing similar like investments and similar like new clusters of talent pop up in like many different communities and different universities in Western Europe. And so I think that it's still very early days. And now that AI supremacy is getting tightly woven with matters of economic dominance as well as national security for many nations. I think that arms race is I think that is what it's become. Right, it is become an arms race, and it's only going to get even more intense over the next 5 years.
Looking forward to see how this is going to develop. And talking about exactly a bit about the future, have you seen any AI businesses that has created some completely new business model, or something that you are thinking that could have a big potential, but you still didn't see on the market?
Yeah, in many meaningful ways, right? The most obvious of which is everyone who's Gen Z and younger that I know, they don't Google anything anymore, right? They go straight to ChatGPT or Perplexity or whatever AI uh, query or platform that they use, and they start there. And concurrently, I think the quality of my own personal user experience on Google has dramatically cratered over the last 6 months, especially as fewer users of the internet, click on like links that drive these search engines and the page rank algorithms from Google search. And so how we discover new information, how we research, how we find services, how many service providers and retailers that want to sell things and services to us find us, get our attention, and how they pay for that. I think all those playbooks are absolutely being ripped up, and nobody has any clue as to how the dust will settle and what this new world order would look like. And so I'm very, very excited to see what that could be. But I don't think anyone's come close to figuring out what that new world order would look like yet. That whoever does is going to make a lot of money.
That's really exciting to live through this transformation and see how AI is really transforming how we live, how we work, and also internet as well. And as we go into the end of the episode, I wanted to ask you some advice for founders building AI-enabled company. If you can give us as well some tips you think they could be useful, practical for building the next generation of AI-enabled companies.
Yeah, I would say that that advice that I give them is the exact same that I would have given a SaaS founder 5 years ago, right? Which is, at the end of the day, speed is king. With SaaS businesses, it's how can you grow as fast as possible so that you can stay in front of all of the new copycats, and what I call ankle biters, right? That will try to build the exact same thing you're doing, but for another niche market at a tenth of the price. The faster you can deploy, the faster you can build an ecosystem of applications, et cetera, around you, the more of an advantage you would have. And I'd say the same advice applies to AI-enabled founders today, right? Except the why is a bit different. It is grow as fast as possible so that you can deepen that data moat as much as possible, and make sure you actually use that data moat, right? This isn't 2015 anymore, where you could just say, well, I have big data, and assume that there's inherent value in that. Use that data moat to drive competitive advantage. Use it to build models, to train models, to get them to a level of performance that nobody else starting from scratch can get, and use that to lock in your performance advantage, which gives you pricing advantage, which makes it possible for you to build an increasingly durable company. Keep an eye on that data, invest in that data, and leverage that to try to build compounding speed.
Ivy, thank you very much for your contribution. And I want to just go in the last question, also always related to some advice, also specifically for, we'll say, European startup, as many of our audience, they are from Europe, but also they are maybe building European businesses. How can we compete with the US rich capital and big talent pool? What would be your advice for European companies?
That's a beautiful question. I would say that European founders on the whole have always been much more conservative about costs. And they manage every venture capital raise as if it will be their last one, right? And so that increases the likelihood of survival, especially compared to a US based, especially Silicon Valley based startup that will spend as if there's no tomorrow, and as if the money spigot was always coming. And I think that that orientation to cost consciousness, and the extra care in terms of finding ways to drive operating leverage and greater scale will serve European founders very well. And with regard to how do you compete with these US companies, I'd say that European founders, because they've had to build their startups and they've managed their careers in a regulatory environment that was always much more forward thinking with regard to data privacy, access, and so on, will always have an advantage operating, especially in the B2B setting in the European markets compared to startup founders that started their businesses in the US, where I think we're a bit more laissez-faire with data access and kind of data regulations. And so stick with what you know, take advantage of home field advantage and try to get to meaningful scale on the European market before you even bother with the US market at all. Because I think you can it's very difficult to outgun a much more aggressively capitalized US-based company on US soils.
Ivy, thank you very much for your time. It was really insightful. Thank you very much for all your time. And if you have any latest comment, please let me know. And hopefully we can catch up maybe in a year, 6 months, a year time, see how AI is changing the world. So thanks for your time again.
Thank you so much, Michael. And if anyone wants to get in touch for a deeper conversation, or if you have a startup that you'd like to pitch me and my team, my email is ivy@gft.vc. Please feel free to get in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ivy.
Hi there. Welcome to my channel. I'm Michael Coppola. I'm excited to have you here. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Together, let's explore the incredible potential of entrepreneurship, business innovation, and technology to take your ventures to the next level.